Welcome to Business by Nature. Here we talk all things women, business, and nature. When the world is telling us to do it one way, what happens when we do it our own way? I'm Alina Pazis, and on this show, I'm interviewing female entrepreneurs and teaching about earth processes to show you what it actually looks and feels like to run a business based on your deepest passions and beliefs. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am very pleased to have my friend and colleague, Danelle. Danelle is a trauma-informed life coach for women. She swirls the magical with the practical. She helps you face your fears and gently coax what's hidden in your subconscious mind and body into the light. In the light, your shame dissolves, destructive patterns are broken, heavy burdens are finally surrendered, pleasure is remembered, safety is found, and soft, glowing joy becomes your baseline. Danelle, I'm so happy you are here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I forgot what I wrote in that intro because I do different things every time. So I'm like, oh, I like that.
And it felt really good to say. And knowing you and knowing your work, it feels right on track.
Yay, I love that.
So, Danelle, the first thing I'd love to jump in with is you used to be a nurse. Technically, you still are a nurse if you want to be, but like that used to be your day-to-day profession, right?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
This switch you made at some point in your life from nurse to coach, was it informed by what you were seeing being a nurse?
I love that question. Yes, 100%. I mean, this is I've taken this winding road to get to coaching, which kind of infuses everything, like all of my education and my interests and my experiences in my life. So I actually have a master's degree in Chinese medicine. I was initially going into natural medicine because I had this really hard time with the Western healthcare system, really sick in different ways growing up. So I was like, okay, natural medicine is it. Got into that schooling, realized that natural medicine and the education of that kind of in the modern world was missing certain pieces that I was like, okay, so let's try to bring in the Western healthcare too and kind of see what the integration is here. How much can I learn about what we know about healing and health and restoration? And yeah, I then worked as a nurse also to just kind of it became important to me to have consistency in my income. And working as a natural health practitioner, I realized I either had to kind of start my own business, like my own acupuncture practice, and I just wasn't feeling resonant with that at that time in my life. I just didn't realize that that's what I would maybe have to do. So I was feeling a bit financially just inconsistent and wanted some grounding. So going to nursing school and really diving into the Western system and then getting a job as a nurse, I was able to have consistent income and just kind of be that my goal was to be a bridge between holistic philosophy and healing and in the Western system. I was kind of I'm infiltrating the healthcare system to be this really loving, compassionate space holding practitioner in nursing that we sometimes don't see because nurses are burned out and it's a whole thing. So got into nursing and realized really quickly that my favorite aspect of it was just being with my patients. We had med passes, I worked in all different kinds of facilities, methadone clinics, psychiatric wards, long-term health facilities, hospitals. And it was really fast-paced a lot of the time. And what I found is when I would have a slower day, I could actually spend time with my patients and rub lotion on them and talk to them and just hold this space for them that so many of them were just craving, but was just not like part of the norm in like a hospital or in like a, you know, quote unquote healing environment in the Western system. Everything's so fast. And I just like found profound like joy and happiness and connection with people who were like sometimes just at like their, you know, lowest like moments in their life, who are so vulnerable and we're going through all the emotions. Like I think of it as like this underworld, like this underbelly of society as a nurse, where you're just like in it with people who are not in their like professional, like everyday, like masking state. They're like stripped away, like it's very raw, it's very vulnerable. And being with them in that like very real, authentic space and talking to them and listening to them and like giving them that gift was so like transformative for me. And I was like, oh my God, like this is it. Like this is the support that's like so necessary for people in these vulnerable states. And that ended up like moving me into this place of being a full-time nurse was like very exhausting for me. Like I'm highly sensitive, neurodiverse. I've always like I've always felt this sense of being behind or like not enough for like society standards, because I would like get burned out and I would get tired and I like felt like I couldn't keep up. And so I decided to kind of look into like alternate, like something I could do on the side. So I could just be a nurse part-time. And it led me to like health coaching because I was like, oh, this is so interesting. This is kind of like, it's kind of a mirror of that space of being with clients without being in the hospital environment or like being in that like urgent, like environment that really activates me. And so I got certified in that as I was working as a nurse. And I realized quickly that like health coaching, you know, it's just like a small piece of everything. And life coaching and kind of being like more of a general life coaching practitioner felt like really resonant with me to hold space for my people like online through Zoom and stuff. And then it just like evolved into like somatic coaching, existential kink, like trauma informed stuff. And I took more trainings along the way. But that was kind of like the progression. And I I feel really grateful to have like found my way in that way. Like there were many steps to it, but all along the way I developed like more and more clarity of like what was resonant to me and like what felt right and like what felt like me being most in my gifts in a way that felt like I was contributing and enjoying myself and able to kind of, you know, part of like doing what I do is like I need to care for myself in such profound ways. If I'm burned out and like coming to a session, it doesn't like work. Like, yes, I can still have a session and like do whatever, but I find that just intrinsic to this path is like me unshaming myself, learning how to regulate my nervous system so that I can hold space for other people. So I'm not always at that edge of like burnout and like feelings of inadequacy. Like it really feels deeply nourishing. So yeah, I'm going to end that answer there. That was long and winding, but yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm curious. I have, well, I have two different things I want to ask. I'll ask the first one, which is, what are some of the ways that you have found as someone who runs their own business and is seeing patients, clients, routinely? What are ways that you have found to fill your cup, to not be running on empty, to have a regular nervous system? Where, and even I think more specifically in that question might be, where are some of the things or places that you've had to unshame ways of your own being to better understand them, to actually get what you need?
Yeah, I love that question. I wrote it down. So, yeah, this is so, it's such like an ongoing journey. Like it really is, because it fluctuates with life things that just are happening like outside of business. So I find that being able to create my own schedule, and truly, this is something I had to learn like pretty quickly, is like giving myself permission to sometimes, like, I'm pretty consistent now at this point, but like at the beginning, even like having 1 or 2 sessions a day was a lot because I would like mentally be preparing for it and being like, is this going to go well? Am I going to like coach well? Like really kind of having that like self-focus. And it would expend a lot of energy. So giving myself the permission right off the bat to like, if I need to reschedule someone, like that's okay because I'm living the example of what it looks like to take care of myself. And that was very scary for me because it like went against what I thought of as like professionality and like running your own business. You always have to show up no matter what you feel, no matter what's going on. And honestly, even just giving myself that space and like going through that process of learning how to be okay and not criticize myself, not beat myself up, not make myself wrong for like needing a break when my body tells me to take a break was profoundly healing. And then even going through that process, like allowed me to work more with my energy and also get on the side of like my people love me no matter what. Like they don't think less of me if I need to take a break here and there. If I'm honest with them, they're going to be able to receive that and like actually feel more positive feelings towards me because I have respected my boundaries. Um, and what I find is like I need to be quite particular about what I'm consuming in a day and like how I'm spending time in between sessions. So I find that when I'm at this kind of like maybe I'm working a lot or I'm like kind of reaching that like dysregulated state, I'll start to like scroll on social media like in between sessions and just try to do things to disassociate and just like what I find is that can be okay. And I think that can be really healthy sometimes, but kind of on like a from a deeper place, like getting into those habits just causes more depletion because I'm not like facing what I'm feeling. Even if I take like a moment and I'm like, okay, that session was intense, or like I have something to process here, instead of like scrolling and just kind of mindlessly going into that, I'll take some time, like maybe a couple minutes every couple of hours in the day, and just like, okay, what am I feeling right now? And just like checking in, acknowledging what I'm feeling. But mostly it's been like this real mindset shift to like, um, truly what keeps coming up is like this mindset shift to like, it's okay and it's acceptable that like I have this highly sensitive, exquisite like nervous system that I've been taught when I was younger was somehow like wrong or not normal. And the truth is, like, it's my literal superpower. Like, that's so cliche to say, but once I started to learn how to work with like the energies of my bodies, the sensations, like doing my own somatic work, um, I started to be able to like release the judgment, and the image I'm seeing is like ride like the waves. So now like I'm able to really ride the waves of emotions that come in and through and sensations that come in and through without judgment or self-criticism. And it opens up this whole new world and capacity for like energy. Like I have so much capacity. And I've gotten this question before where it's like, oh, you do trauma informed coaching. Like, isn't that hard? Isn't that like heavy? Like you're hearing about trauma and stuff. I'm like, it actually does not feel heavy to me anymore. Like it feels light because I'm not seeing them as like a victim. I'm seeing them like in their truest, highest place. And I'm like meeting them there where they're not broken. I'm not pathologizing them. Like they're not helpless. And learning to see myself like that has given me like the space to see my clients like that. And just that like shift has increased my capacity to like hold all of it.
I want to know even more about what you do in those couple minutes. You said now
Mhm.
you've gotten to the place where every few hours during the
Yeah,
day,
yeah,
you
yeah.
just sit with yourself for a couple minutes and you just do a couple things. Walk us through that. I feel like me and other people listening, I'm like, we
Mhm.
want that. What do you do? What are your things? What do you ask yourself? Tell us.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I was just doing this before our call because I told you before we started recording, I drink like a huge cacao smoothie, and cacao sometimes like is great in like small doses for me, and in other times like it can make me feel, I was writing about this before we got on the call, simultaneously open and closed. Like it's a weird, like I feel crazy, like open and closed. And um what I did right before we got on this call is essentially I wrote down just to kind of keep track, because sometimes I think just either speaking it out loud or writing it down to like put it into 3D reality about like what you're feeling inside of your body is regulating in itself, to kind of have this like, I want to call it like an external sense of a witness, even if it's just you witnessing yourself, like writing it down, speaking it out. Um, so I wrote down like some of the sensations I was feeling in the body, even if it's hard to articulate, I'll just do as best I can. I'll be like open, closed, free and trapped, um, emptiness, fullness, heaviness, like in my stomach, diaphragm, chest, tension in my throat. Um, and then as I'm writing it down, I'm connecting to and acknowledging the sensations. I'm just like, okay, this is the reality. Like, I'm not trying to fight it. I'm not trying to move it. Like, I think that's really important for me because I have like rebellion. Like, if I'm like, I shouldn't feel this way, like, I need to feel different. Like, I'm going on this call, I'm doing this podcast, I should feel relaxed. I'm not going to be able to know what to say. I'm going to feel weird. I'm just like, okay, the reality is you feel this way. If I start to fight with it or rebel against it, it's going to lead to just an increase in the discomfort. And discomfort's okay. Like I can show up with discomfort. I always do. Like it's part of my human experience. And so when I can see it like this, where I have this like dance of like openness in my body and closedness, like tension and anxiety and relaxation and spaciousness. And so in those few minutes, I counted down from 21, for whatever reason, 21. And I told myself, okay, the feelings in my body, specifically that like I would describe it as some like anxiety, some like tension, tightness, the constriction in my throat, the kind of hollowness, it mirrored some version of anxiety for me. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to count down from 21 and I'm just going to let the feelings become even stronger. So the tension, I'm going to let it become more intense. The simultaneous like hollowness and closedness, I'm going to let those both like become more like simultaneously. And counting down, I basically just tell myself, and this is like intense, but it really works. I'm like, all right, I'm going to let these sensations kill me if they need to. Like, just go for it. Like, it's a real facing of like that fear. So I think all anxiety is in some way like a fear of death or a fear of some kind of like dissolution of the ego. And so I'm like, all right, like, go for it, give it to me. And I'll tell my anxiety or the sensations that I'm feeling to just get more and more intense. And I just get on the side of like riding this wave. And I stood in the bathroom, before we started, and I just like had my hands on the counter. And I'm just like, all right, more, 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 more. And I'm just like breathing more, 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 more. And then what happens is inevitably the sensations kind of stay the same because the brain does this weird thing where like if you tell it you want more anxiety, it's like, oh, she must not be in an actual crisis if she wants more of the feeling. Like it's in the resistance that things get like really intense that can turn into like a panic attack. And so there's like this weird feedback every time I've found that like when I tell myself, like, give me more, and I genuinely mean it. And this is like a whole practice that I've done with myself, like somatically to open the doors to like giving myself permission to feel the fear and like ride it anyway. Um, it just kind of stays the same, which then settles things just enough, or it just goes away. It's like, all right, I guess we're safe. So that's like an example of one thing, and that can just take like 2 minutes. Like all of that I just described, because it's just leaning so far into it and letting yourself, it's like this radical permission to feel the weird sensations in the body. And I feel so many sensations and like very intense sensations in my body. I'm like one of those people. And so I find there can be this background like resistance and fear to like feeling a lot versus just opening the floodgates and saying, all right, like I'm powerless to this, just take me with you. So there's that. And then there's like all different kinds of versions of that I do throughout the course of a day. And it just like is so natural at this point. Like I find that I've gone through periods of like really intense morning anxiety. And before I even wake up, so I'm in that like, I think it's called the hypnagogic stage or something before like wakefulness and sleep, where I can do this practice in my head where I'm like, okay, lean into it, lean into it. And by the time I wake up, I feel totally fine, like no anxiety at all. So it's like, it really is this like, I think of it as like an alchemical like process where you get on the side of the sensations and you let them ride through. And yeah, doing that, like I do that so much throughout the day because I'm constantly feeling like activation and just kind of reminding myself it's safe and moving through it. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to repeat the order back to you and you tell me if I have it right, because I
Yeah.
feel like if I was listening to this, I would want to be writing this down. Um, so first thing, pause, take a moment. Second thing, step into witnessing yourself. Third thing, list out the sensations you're feeling in your body. So physical sensations. Step 4, pick a number to count down from and tell yourself, as I count down, we're going to expand the things I just said.
Yeah.
Step 5, count all the way down. And then you will likely feel it either dissipate a little bit or completely go away.
Yeah.
And step 6, just move into the next thing.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I love that recap. I think that's like so good to have it kind of like organized. The thing I would add is like when you're listing out the sensations or like acknowledging, speaking out like the feelings in your body on like a physical level, we experience sensations and emotions differently. You know, like not everyone experiences like just like the physical sensations and emotions strongly. So I tell my clients like the sensations, this is kind of interesting to wrap our minds around, but they can also be in like, I call it like your like field of consciousness. For example, disassociation and numbness can feel like it's like depersonalization, where you don't feel like you're in your body, you're like somewhere outside. It's like your consciousness is split. It's a really, it can be really disorienting. So when I take myself and my clients through this, I'm like, what you want to be looking for, as you're like naming what's going on to the best of your like ability, is you're looking for like textures, shapes, colors, even like sounds that you associate with what you're feeling. This can be inside of the body, this can be outside of the body, but just really trusting your brain as you are connecting with the sensations, trusting where your mind goes. Another thing that comes up is like if you have flashes of like memories, this is really helpful for me. It's like if I'm feeling, say, like the tension in the throat, and I'm like, okay, I'm acknowledging that I'm like feeling this tension and tightness in my throat. Is there a time in the past as a child, a young person, where I can remember like feeling the same thing or like something very similar? And it'll just be like a little boop. Like sometimes the memory will come in. Doesn't matter if the memory is quote unquote like real or not. It can be a compilation of things. Memory is like distorted anyway when we like think back. It's like based on our own perception. So that can come through. And if a memory comes through like that, I'll kind of acknowledge, like, okay, in that moment when I was younger, when I felt that same thing, or in that circumstance that's coming up, no one understood exactly how I felt, but I understand how I felt. So I kind of create this bridge between like my child self or my younger self, where maybe that core memory or sensation was like forged. And I'll be like, I understand. And it's a real like acknowledgement that really settles my nervous system in the moment, because it can be really scary and like intense to be with the feelings in your body, and no one really understands. Like I like thinking about how we're all one and like we're all part of the whole, but at the same time we're having these like individual experiences of having a human body and mind. And it's really hard a lot to just like be in a body. At least that's how it is for me. I'm like, being a human is an intense experience. Like, I love it. I'm obsessed with it. It's a crazy, thrilling, weird, unique ride. But I feel like my consciousness is also not completely adapted to like being in a human body. Like, so giving myself space to like tell myself, like, okay, child version of me experienced that. There was something that happened that created a sensation in my body and her body. No one really understands what that's like on like a personal level, even though we're all connected, but I understand. Like that in itself has been so like restorative for me to contact that version of me that probably felt really alone and different and weird for feeling what she was feeling, but unable to express it as a child. Like to have language for these things when we're young and we don't have anything to compare it to, like those are the core memories where we just bring these things with us that become these stories that like become these underlying, yeah, like tales we tell ourselves and about the world. And so having that acknowledgement. Another thing you said um, is, yeah, I love this list, like pause, witness yourself, lists out the sensations, can be in your field of consciousness, using like shapes, colors, I mean, whatever works for you, even like vibrations, like little, sometimes I think about there's like a little ping in like my left side field of consciousness, a little vibration, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but just like comes up, things like that, where you're just like picking out. Yeah, picking a number to count down from. As you count down, give yourself space to expand the sensations in the body, count all the way down. It'll likely dissipate. Another thing I use here that if I'm like really quite dysregulated or my clients are quite dysregulated and we're going through this, I'll do some tapping, like emotional freedom technique. I find having that like connection to your body, especially for neurodiverse women, which that's like a whole other thing, because I feel like we're all neurodiverse in our own ways. We talked about this on my podcast, but like I find that having physical connection to yourself as you are experiencing and processing emotions and sensations can be so grounding, especially when there's kind of this, when it feels like unsafe, like when you feel kind of outside of yourself or something's causing fear, like just doing a round of like, even though I'm feeling tension in my throat, my stomach is flip-flopping, I give myself permission to feel what I feel without shame, without judgment. I'm choosing to not resist what I'm feeling. I'm giving myself space to amplify the sensations and kind of just going through like a quick practice or process like that to me like really helps kind of clear and move what's going on.
I love this. I love this so much. Yeah, it's really reminding me of the conversation we had on your podcast,
Yeah.
um, about neuro. Yeah, I think the language we're using nowadays is neurodiversity, which is a great phrase. And I feel like all modern words and phrases to things are our current best attempts at using language to point to something. And then I think over time, we find different language and stuff because, yeah, there's this irony of, okay, well, everyone's brain's actually different, obviously. So, like, what does neurodiverse really even mean? But
Right.
under all of this, yes, as I have discovered more of my own neurodiversity and realized that that's what's happened, like that's actually what would you say, like the nugget, like the princess and the pea, and you're searching for the pea, and something's off, and you can't figure out what it is, and you're searching. Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And then my experience was finally getting to the pea, which is, oh, it's really neurodivergent. And that
Yes.
leads to the anxiety, and that leads to why that was a traumatic event, and that leads to blank, blank, blank. That's been my experience. Um, but as I've sat with this and experienced this, my takeaway is that this experience that many of us are having, I think of it like a new level of intelligence entering the planet.
Yes.
And we're like in a state of evolution, and human bodies aren't yet equipped to keep up with the processing level of this new intelligence.
Yes.
And so I love these little tricks you have, um, because especially like these tactile things, even on this call, I've noticed myself, I've just been rocking, like I'm standing as we talk, and I've been
Yeah.
rocking back and back, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a sign. And then I pick up my little, rock thing that I'm holding, and
Yes.
I'm rubbing this, and I'm like, oh, there's another one. And
Yeah.
these tactile physical things
Yeah.
like the tapping
Yeah.
are really helpful, because um otherwise the level of processing that's happening in the
Yeah.
consciousness is
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah.
And I love how you talk about, okay, yes, yes, track the sensations in your body, but that might not be you. And also just what's in your consciousness, what's in your field, whatever
Yeah.
language you want to use. Because one of the things I've been learning about, what we're currently calling autistic minds, like people who are autistic, is their brains work in a web-like structure, which is very
Mm.
different than some other brains. And so as you were talking about, tap into what's in your consciousness, and oh, there's something over here and there's something over here. I'm like, that's the web. That's the
Yeah.
web right there. Some people have these, their consciousness is this web, and unless they kind of get to acknowledge it, sense it, say it, feel it, make it real to themselves, witness themselves in it, it's just there going anyways.
Yeah.
So I was just so struck at these this whole little system that you've created, for yourself and for your clients. And I'm like, as with everything that I'm learning, I'm like, oh my God, that makes sense because of this. That makes sense because of this for the neurodivergent lens.
Right.
And it makes sense without the neurodivergent lens deeply as well. But that new layer I'm so excited by. And I imagine that a fair amount of your clients might be neurodivergent because,
Yeah.
yeah, the skills that you've developed feel like the ones that these women are needing.
Right. I love that reflection so much because like, yeah, I'm pretty sure like yes, almost 100% of my clients and the women who just come to me naturally are neurodivergent in some way, whether they've been they've actually gone to a psychiatrist or whatever and done an evaluation and like actually like gotten some kind of um I want to call it diagnosis, I guess, but or they haven't because so much is not understood about like just how vast neurodiversity is, and especially in women, like so many medical studies and trials are done on boys and men. And so I love what you're saying, like this web, that is always how my brain has worked, but I've never had the systems for it. Like, we're not taught this stuff in school. We're not taught to think like this. We're taught to think in very linear ways. And what I have found has been so, and I want to use the word like restorative, because I almost think healing can kind of like connotate that like there's something to be healed. And I find that that just pathologizes deeper, like that there's a problem to be fixed. And I'm like, no, this is a fucking superpower. Like the ability to have a brain that works on in all these different facets. And I think about ADHD because that's the thing I've been, formally diagnosed with, is like my brain is operating on so many levels all the time that it without systems and structures that can hold me and help me process everything that's going on in my mind, I can just feel overwhelmed. It's like we talked about like experiencing burnout a lot in the past. It's like I can just get burned out. Like my system gets fried without having these practices that allow me to channel that like multi-dimensional, like everywhere my brain goes into um practices that can help me. This is what really helps about like parts work with me too. I do like a very specific version of parts work that isn't like internal family systems, but it's a bit different, where it's kind of like pulling out like it's a way to organize like the internal reality where there is this like web where there's like so much happening that when we don't have the systems, the supportive systems, it can just feel disorganized, overwhelming, too much, can lead to just panic, disassociation, masking. Like I'm an absolute pro at masking, just like throughout my life, being able to appear like normal and fine in the world, but in my body just feeling so much and like going through a lot. But I found this like real orientation to the way my brain works, and helping my clients with the same, where it's like you can create this internal world where you take what's already there and already happening and you build in this trust that you are like a magical divine human and everything makes sense and everything's exactly where it should be. But when you are looking through, I think of it like as like a crystal, and there's like all these different facets, essentially all these different lenses we can like see ourselves through. And you're looking through like this one facet that society told you is the right one to look through. And it just looks like chaos, like when you look at yourself, your internal world through that lens. And it's really an intense experience because you have all these stories and indoctrinations of how you should be. And then you look at yourself and and you're like, but I'm not like that. And like the things that you should feel and the successes, quote unquote, successes that you should have, and like everything. So you look through this lens and you're like, oh my God, what is going on inside of me? This is like out of control. And it leads to this shame and this judgment and this fear of your own self and this self-criticism versus like just finding a different orientation or angle towards yourself where you can create these systems, these processes, these practices that like support all of these parts of you that are trying to express themselves, but just feel like they're bad or they're wrong or like they shouldn't be there. So we start to suppress and pretend like things are fine when they're not. And we start to walk on eggshells and start to organize our lives in these ways that like accommodate how we think we should be. But it just fucks with us. Like it's not it. Like it suppresses our gifts. Like I honestly, genuinely think that neurodiversity in women, high sensitivity, like these things that are so special, like we are the ones who can really change things in like amazing ways for people in the world, for society. But without having like an orientation towards ourselves that is so loving and so approving and so on our own side and like having our own backs, without that, it can be so hard. It's like two sides of the same coin. It can either be so beautiful and nourishing and life-giving and spectacular and magical, or like really fucking hard and intense. And like I think a lot about this when women, because I've gone through this a lot too, when women who have neurodiversities are not orienting themselves towards themselves in a way that is supportive for them, they can develop like suicidal ideation. Things can feel really dark and really heavy. Depression, generalized anxiety, like it can feel so bleak to like live in a body where you haven't developed like these systems for yourself or unshamed. And there can be numbness, dulling out these parts of you. And it's extremely scary. Like it can be really, really, really hard. And I just think about myself from like years ago where I was just in the shit. Like I didn't know how to work with myself because we're not taught this. Like I don't blame myself at all. Like we're just not taught this. But I was really lost and really scared and had really scary experiences and didn't know how to process any of it. And learning this stuff has been so life-giving. Like I don't even know how else to describe it. It's been so life affirming that now I just like I love the ride, like the roller coaster of life so much. Like I feel really grateful to like have this experience of being a human. Whereas before I was like, I don't belong on this earth. This is too hard. Everything's so scary. I don't know what my problem is, but like I just can't keep up with this. And it's completely flipped. And I haven't changed. Like I've always been the same. It's my relationship to myself and these parts of me that have changed. It's the orientation that I viewed myself through, like the lens has changed and shifted. It's the only thing that shifted. So I always find that so interesting.
Danelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I feel like this conversation got into pockets that are the most alive for me, and it's so inspiring to talk about these angles because everything you're talking about is exactly what I'm doing in business, on the business side, on the
Yeah.
systems, like just it's so cool. Like I'm so glad to know how much of a resource you are for the lived experience in these realms because yeah, just as you were saying, it's a really big number of the population actually, and it's growing, and we weren't taught it. It's very hidden. And you now are sitting on like a very large chunk of lived experience, both with yourself and with your clients, of how to navigate this.
Yeah.
Please let us know what is a great way to connect with you. How do people find you? What if they want to get more from you? Where should they go?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I love everything you're saying. And I love that you're like in that business, specifically business, but also life side of things. Like the systems and processes in business are so important, especially for neurodiverse women. Um, so yeah, I am on Facebook. I think my Facebook name is like Nurse Nell 33. If you go to facebook.com/Nurse Nell 33. I'm also on Instagram at nurse_Nell 33. I have a podcast called Too Human with Nurse Nell that's on Spotify and Apple. Um, I do free consultations. Yeah, you can find everything like if you go to one of those places. Have a bunch of free classes that are like amazing free resources. And yeah.
Thank you so much. The podcast is very pleased to have had you here today.
Yay. I'm so pleased to be here. This is truly like, it's such an honor. Seriously.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Business by Nature podcast. If you did, please rate it wherever you tune in and share it with a friend so more entrepreneurs learn that business and nature are not at odds. The more we see business as a creative act of nature, the more ease and natural growth we experience. To learn more specifically how to work with nature in your business, take our potent quiz to uncover your unique force of nature so you can stop fighting it and start harnessing it. Go to forceupnaturequiz.com to get your results in 2 minutes. If you're ready to uplevel your business according to your nature, our Business by Nature Power Session is the best starting place. You can find this and more intensive programs at businessbynature.com. For more insights, humor, and highlights, join us over on Instagram at Business by Nature.